Unit 6. The Fatal Flaw. Develop strategy to achieve targets. Hello, manager. This is your coach, Victor Marc Romo. This unit is very important. It is the start of intense planning, analysis, and developing of strategy. Please be very patient because it compromises 4 units. Said this, welcome to your Unit 6 of Strategic Planning and Performance Management. The fatal flaw in many organizations' strategies lies in their misunderstanding of competitive advantage, and this error is very widespread. Most organizations misread performance on internal processes and capabilities as their competitive advantage. They become complacent in the knowledge that their systems are best practice or quality. Yet the response to such claims should be, so what? They aren't a competitive advantage. At which point the blood may drain from managers' faces. In previous units, we explained how internal processes are mistaken for the strategic factors. You should have this in your top of mind. Unfortunately, they are also mistaken for competitive advantage. This unit demonstrates the development of strategy to achieve objectives, covering essential concepts such as value, differentiation, and positioning. So, we are going to review essential concepts. Let's start. Number 1. Range of competitors. Our definition of competitors may be a little bit broader than you have been used to in the past. You may have thought of competitors as relevant only to the relationship between an organization or business unit and its customers. The strategy emphasizes this almost to the exclusion of relationships between an organization and its key stakeholders. Under this customers-only perspective, the only competitors, for example, of British Airways are other airlines such as Singapore, Japan, and Qantas Airlines. But the harsh reality is that British Airways faces a much larger array of competitors through its transactions with key stakeholders other than customers. Let's take a much wider view on who your competitors are. Take the case of employees. Not only are the airlines included, but also organizations outside the airline industry, such as hotels, restaurants, and a vast array of other organizations competing for office staff. A different set of competitors also emerges for British Airways, suppliers, and for its owners. It may seem new to suggest that any organization has competitors for its owners. This is not the way in which the term competitors is conventionally employed. However, competitors do exist for an organization's owners, whether they be shareholders of a public or private company. or the government in the case of a public sector organization. Owners are one of the suppliers of funds, and they can decide to put their money elsewhere. In the case of British Airways, the competitors for its owners are, of course, other publicly listed airlines, but also any publicly listed organization that can show a better return than British Airways. So, this wider view of competitors has been illustrated in figure 4.1 in Unit 4, but the emphasis there was on key stakeholders and strategic factors. Here, reviewing the essential factors, our emphasis is on competitors. They exist for all key stakeholders. Public and private sector differences. As it is obvious that the shareholders of a public company, such as IBM, have many choices, many people do not realize that shareholders of an organization, such as the Department of Social Security of the government, also have many choices. The funds can be directed to defense, to education, to roads, to new petroleum refinement plants, to public transportation, etc. This highlights one of the major differences between public and private sector organizations. As illustrated in figure 6.1, in the case of the private sector, capital funds flow from the owners to the organization, where by and large operating funds come from customers. In a public sector organization, one, when there is no charge for services such as education or social security, both capital and operating funds flow from the owners of the organization, an example, the government. Such public sector organizations maintain, should you ask them, that they do not have competitors. Social Security may say, for example, that it has none since no one else provides Social Security. However, when such an organization considers competitors in the wider context proposed here, it becomes obvious that it does have major competitors, on the owner side at least. Defense and education are just two of their competitors for the funds that flow from the government to Social Security, as illustrated in figure 6.1, pointed here. Both capital and operating funds come from the owners of Social Security, and competition is indeed intense for that money. It is important for you to define competitors as a much larger set than one that focuses only on your customers. Let's say that each and every one of your key stakeholders has also competitors. Let me emphasize, your organization or business unit faces competitors for all its key stakeholders. Don't be blinded by much of the strategy and books that focuses only on competitors for our customers. We have a customer-centric approach in the strategic planning outside of this theory and practice. So, please pay attention on this. And even more if you are one of the public sector employees. Through our strategic factor, you will begin to consider competitors as a much more diverse set of organizations than you have previously thought. As value is what our key stakeholders seek from us and our competitors, we move on to consider strategies to provide value superior to our competitors. Defining value. In strategic planning, the term value has been used in a number of different ways. In the case of economic value, we are talking of operating profit minus taxes minus cost of capital. If the value added is positive, an organization has performed effectively. The higher the value added, the more effective the performance, at least in one of the terms of this definition. Proposed here in strategic planning and performance management is a different view of value. Value based on strategic factors. Value is concerned with assessing the transactions or potential transactions between key stakeholders and the organization or business unit. In addition, it is the key stakeholders that make the assessment of value, not the organization itself. In the case of owners, their perception of value relates to whether or not they are getting a good deal from their relationship with this organization. Likewise, other key stakeholders judge value on whether the transactions in which they are engaged with an organization are favorable to them. One way of expressing value is what we get for what we give. You will recall and remember that we identify 6 strategic factors for one of 7-Eleven's key stakeholders, its customers. Location, hours of operation, customer service, range of goods sold, store presentation, and price. So, in the case of 7-Eleven, the store offers location, hours of operation, customer service, range of goods sold, and store presentation, while it expects or gets payment from a customer's point of view. The transaction looks like figure 6.2 pointed here. Value from a customer perspective is the balance between price as an indicator of dollars spent and the 5 other strategic factors. The charge for a bundle of items is weighted up against performance on the other 5 factors. If the quotation and equation is positive, such that customers feel they are getting a good deal, they remain loyal. If, on the other hand, they don't think performance on these 5 factors is at last equal to the price, they look elsewhere. What strategic factors serve to emphasize is how purely subjective value really is. Here we are talking about a current rather than a potential customer of a convenience store. But potential customers make similar calculations when they decide whether to become customers or not. This is very important for sales managers and sales people. You have to check the value you offer in your strategic factors to your customers. Strategic factors, performance and value. The relationship between strategic factors and value is illustrated in figure 6.3. It shows the strategic factors give rise to decision criteria, what we were talking above. Key stakeholders use these criteria to make a decision to support one organization or business over another. For example, in the case of an hypothetical company that we will call Chance Lotteries, these are the criteria used for potential employees to decide whether or not to become actual employees. Current employees also use these criteria to decide whether or not they should stay on the company. Once we become aware of strategic factors, we can see them everywhere. In deciding whether or not to quit jobs, it has been suggested that employees check these 10 warning signs. You have stopped learning and you're kind of bored. You get no feedback or feed forward from your leader. You have no ascent on the ladder. Your toxic environment is toxic. You have no kind of life outside of work. You simply don't care anymore. You feel regularly stressed, fatigued, or ill, burned out. You are losing confidence and credibility in the organization, with your superiors, and with yourself. You're underpaid. You're at odds with the company. We can see from this list how these decision criteria are a different way of describing many of the strategic factors listed for employees of this company Chance Lotteries. We can also look at strategic factors as performance criteria. The criteria used in the case of stakeholders, of shareholders, dividends, capital growth, company reputation, and operational performance are the basis on which a current or potential shareholder evaluates a company's performance. If this performance is satisfactory, the present shareholder keeps his funds with the company. Should the performance on these 4 strategic factors drop below expectation, however, he or she will cease to invest there. And if a potential shareholder perceives performance as satisfactory, he or she will start investing in that company. Figure 6.3, the strategic factors and value, also links strategic factors to the perception of value. If the evaluation in relation to a certain company is positive, more positive than in the case of a competitor, then the customer will remain with that company. A similar situation holds for any set of key stakeholders. Owners balance the funds they provided against dividends and capital growth, as well as other strategic factors. Employees balance job requirements and strategic factors, such as remuneration and career prospect. To reiterate this important topic, value in our system is approached from key stakeholders' perspective, not those of the organization or business unit. Looking at value in this way allows you to clearly articulate your competitive advantage.
5. Strategic factors and competitive advantage. As we have said, value is the result of balancing strategic factors. So, competitive advantage is the extent to which an organization delivers value superior to that of its competitors. This way of defining competitive advantage applies to the relationship between an organization or business unit and each of its key stakeholders. Let's return to the 7-Eleven convenience store. As you will recall, the strategic factors for a convenience store were location, hours of operation, customer service, range of goods sold, store presentation, and price. Let's now look at several ways in which a 7-Eleven store might achieve competitive advantage by producing superior value. A combination of two or more factors could produce the same effect of superior value. The example of the 7-Eleven store is used because it is one we can all appreciate. Who among us hasn't used the strategic factors lists in one way or another to decide to buy from a particular store instead of its competitors? Of course, life isn't as simple as the 6 individual descriptions above, or even business. Convenience stores like 7-Eleven generally don't stand out on only one strategic factor, such as location or customer service. In actual fact, the store we pick probably does slightly better on a couple of factors, which when taken together and put alongside our expectations, make us decide to buy from it rather from the competition. Nonetheless, the individual descriptions above illustrate the principle that strategic factors not only underpin value, but are the drivers of the competitive advantage. Let's say that again. Strategic factors not only underpin value, but are the drivers of competitive advantage. Now, let's turn our attention to a much larger food retailer, one that bases its strategy on strategic factors. Please read the text about Woolworths Australia. Try to identify its strategic factors so it can develop a competitive advantage. Let me know what do you think about it. 6. What competitive advantage is not? When we view competitive advantage in the way outlined in this course, we bring our thinking back to the realities of the transactions between an organization or business unit and its key stakeholders. Competitive advantage is doing something better than a competitor, but in a way valued by the stakeholder, not valued internally. The last phrase is an important rider here. What's important is not what we as members of an organization or business unit consider competitive advantage to be. It's how our key stakeholders define it. Please, write this down. That is fundamental. We can delude ourselves that we have competitive advantage, when in actual fact we don't. Competitive advantage is not the same as having superior internal capabilities. Planning teams will often say that they have a competitive advantage because they have better technology, or more highly qualified employees, or a lower cost structure. These capabilities may be the springboard to deliver a good competitive advantage, a strong competitive advantage. But managers, please point this down, should not be misled into thinking that they constitute competitive advantage itself. Every time I ask, what is competitive advantage to a manager, they answer me with internal capabilities. So, he will not, or his business unit will not develop actual competitive advantage. These things mean nothing to customers or any other stakeholders unless they translate into something that is valued. For example, better information technology only means something to customers if it delivers better customer service or if it allows an organization to achieve a lower price. In this example, making use of a good internal intranet SharePoint or a good app like the Power Apps, which deliver information to our key employees, does not in itself represent a competitive advantage. It will be a competitive advantage if it translates to value and therefore to a strategic factor. And this strategic factor is valued by a key stakeholder. Please have that in top of mind. It may be that the presence of more highly trained and skilled employees lead to better customer service, but if it doesn't, it is of no consequence as far as customers are concerned. It also means nothing in terms of competitive advantage. Again, to be the lowest cost producer in an industry is not a competitive advantage. This is an indirect message to airlines, which thrive of being the lowest cost airline. Customers do not buy our costs, they pay our price. Being a low-cost producer is, of course, a desirable position to occupy in an industry, and more in an industry which is as competitive as the airline industry. But unless this is translated into something customers or other stakeholders value, for example, price in the case of customers, it means little in competitive advantage terms. We are not simply playing with words here. We are talking about a totally different way of looking at competitive advantage. Many people view competitive advantage from an inside-out view. They look at it from a vantage point inside their organization or business unit. What they see is what they do well, and they tell themselves, we have better technology, we have highly qualified employees, we have a low-cost structure. But please, pause and reflect. This is an inside-out view of performance and competitive advantage, and is also the wrong view, as it misleads an organization or business unit into thinking it is doing well, when in reality it may not be. Money is spent on such things as technology, and the boast is made that a competitive advantage had been gained. This is, of course, nonsense. So again, if we are using correctly our intranet SharePoint and our Power Apps, this in itself is not a competitive advantage. To truly understand competitive advantage, we have to take an outside-in view. We must stand in the shoes of our key stakeholders, which are outside the organization looking in, not inside the organization looking out. When we take this, we get an entirely different picture and come to very different conclusions. Many organizations will see me spend dollars spent on technology in the vain hope of grabbing competitive advantage and grabbing and driving low costs. Dollars spent on training employees with courses they will never use to improve customer service, and so the list goes on. So, please pause a little bit and think. I made this course of strategic planning and performance management. I have completed it. Does it in itself makes a competitive advantage? No. It will also and will only have a competitive advantage if all the things that we learn throughout the course are applied in our organization or business unit. Remember that competitive advantage is how your key stakeholders perceive your performance on strategic factors, not how you perceive your performance on internal process, practices, systems, and things like that. In the rest of this unit, we deal with two important and useful concepts in strategy: differentiation as number one and positioning as number two, and how they too are underpinned by strategic factors. A number of examples with actual companies will illustrate them. Please read through them. Underline, highlight the things that you think are considerable for strategic factors, key stakeholders, competitive advantage, and comments. Thank you. So, please review the cases of positioning. The Lexus, David Jones, and Wool companies are outlined. Please read throughout them. Also about Sears Roebuck, Accor Hotels, and its competitors. Also, the case of repositioning is outlined. The case of Gallo Wines will be put in the LMS course. Let's recapitulate and make a little conclusion of this unit. Developing competitive advantage. We've tackled fundamental concepts in value, competitive advantage, differentiation, and positioning, and repositioning, and have supplied a new approach to each. We have read punctual cases of actual and real companies. All are linked and have common roots: strategic factors. At the heart of strategy lies competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is the soul of strategy. It is by developing that advantage on a set of strategic factors for a key stakeholder that the latter supports an organization or business unit over its own competitors. And let me apologize for being so repetitive, but it is key to understand competitive advantage and strategy, which is linked to the concept of value. Key stakeholders evaluate their transactions with an organization or business unit based on a set of strategic factors. Those strategic factors drive value and value drives competitive advantage. In this way, organizations and business units differentiate themselves from the competition and take a position in the key stakeholders' minds. Perhaps, until now, value, competitive advantage, differentiation, position, and repositioning were unrelated in your strategic mind, or rather, but they seem to come from different sources, from strategic planning, from marketing, from advertising, and from sales. This unit has shown that they are intimately related to each other, and, most importantly, are underpinned by strategic factors. Please, take in your top of mind that this is strategy. Marketing isn't strategy. Sales isn't strategy. This is a core part, the soul part of strategy, the competitive advantage. We believe that the realization of this makes a competitive advantage and also the strategic concepts more useful. They no longer seem like items separated on a shopping list. The next unit takes competitive advantage to its next level, the design of strategy, which is what we have come to this course for. We want to learn how to design strategy and to achieve targets, to achieve objectives, to achieve KPIs. So, I hope that you enjoyed this unit as much as I do. Please remember to underline, remember to highlight your questions, and you can put them in the comment sections. This was Victor Marromo speaking, strategic planning and performance management coach. See you in the next unit. Have a nice day.